So welcome, folks. I'm your host for today's podcast, Dave Johnson. I'm editor-at-large with ISHN Magazine. And my guest today is Deborah Roy. Deborah is the president-elect of the American Society of Safety Professionals, and she's also the president of Safe Tech Consultants in Fairmount, Maine. How's it going in Maine today?
It's lovely and sunny here today.
I'm sure it's a little less humid than it here is in Philadelphia. Let's get started, Deb. Your career started out as the sole occupational nurse on an electronics plant. And over the course of 35 years, you rose to become corporate director of health, safety, and wellness at LL Bean before becoming the president of Safe Tech Consultants. I was wondering if you could tell the listeners what professional skills, and I'm sure there are many, but to try to summarize, Deb, what professional skills enabled you to expand your career horizons so broadly from being the sole occupational nurse at a facility to being the corporate director of health, safety, and wellness for a very well-known consumer company?
Well, I think some of it was luck, and some of it was just the circumstances at the time. When I started as an occupational health nurse, I had the opportunity to actually go into that position right out of college because I went to a co-op university, Northeastern in Boston, which was a 5-year school. Mm-hmm. And my last 2 years actually were working in industry. And so I learned about occupational health nursing at that point. And it's very unusual to go into a specialty right out of nursing education. So I think that again was an unusual circumstance in and of itself. Once I was at Sprague, I had the opportunity to learn a lot about that facility. I was at that facility for 3 years. The plant manager was extremely supportive, and really a lot of the senior staff really, as a young professional right out of college, took me under their wing, and I think that was really important in my career. I also realized at the time that although I could make an impact at the company through reducing workers' comp costs and really better managing a lot of the injuries that were happening, most of which were ergonomic at the time, I also realized that there was a way to prevent them. And so early on through my networking, I actually met Patricia Travers, who actually was in Boston at the time as an occupational health nurse. She was affiliated with what was at that time the Harvard BU sort of advanced education program in this field, and which later morphed into the Educational Resource Center. And so I actually, through Patricia, actually was able to have NIOSH come into the facility and start to do an evaluation. And what we looked at was early intervention into ergonomic cases. So I got really interested in sort of how do we, from a scientific standpoint, prevent these kinds of injuries. I also realized in that facility that there was noise, there were chemicals. We didn't have an industrial hygienist. We didn't have an environmental person. We didn't have a safety person. So I figured somebody had to do it.
Right.
So I started learning a lot of those other areas and found that I really liked those other areas, and I was interested in it. And I had the opportunity. We did have some consultants that came in those areas. I learned a lot from them. And then from there had an opportunity to actually, I was recruited to start an occupational medicine freestanding facility in the area. And from that, got to learn more about management. Basically, I hired the people and bought the furniture and so forth. That really changed my concept of what I wanted to do, because I really enjoyed supporting the staff in that
Mm.
process, as well as doing the technical aspect, because I was at that point already doing more safety for our clients.
Okay.
So walkthroughs in facilities and so forth. And I was very involved at that time in the Occupational Health Nurses Association, so
Hmm.
the main chapter, and the national organization, and really worked my way up through sort of that chapter system
Hmm.
through there, and became president of the state chapter fairly young. And so I had an opportunity at that point to really learn from other people
Hmm.
that had way more experience than I did. I was the youngster pretty much
Yeah.
the whole time in those organizations. So got to know people that way, really did networking
Hmm.
to learn more than anything else. I was curious, I was interested in these other fields, and then went back to grad school, and had the opportunity to go to an educational resource center
Okay.
school, which was University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And and again, that gave me the opportunity to look at both health and safety
Right.
at that time. And that really expanded my opportunities. And I think part of that is just being interested in learning about the
Mm.
other disciplines. And and then from there went into a corporate role in the environmental industry.
Oh.
And I knew a little bit of industrial hygiene at that point, but I really didn't know anything about um, air monitoring instrumentation on hazardous waste sites at that point. But that's what we did. So
Mm.
that company, which has now been bought out a number of times, but it was called Groundwater Technology at that point. Um, I actually was able to design all of the training that we did throughout the U.S. for the HAZWAPER standard.
Wow.
So for working on hazardous waste sites,
Hmm.
the standard was new. And this is an example of it, luck or opportunity. The standard happened to be new at that
Mm.
point, and I was able to actually design that whole program, and had staff and trained staff to actually go out and implement the 40-hour training and the 8-hour refreshers. We wrote all the curriculum for it, um, and then also had to deal with medical surveillance, and that
Mhm.
fit well into my occupational health nursing background. So trying to do medical surveillance for uh, all of these different offices all over the US,
Mhm.
some of which were in rural areas, working with local vendors and so forth. That was a great opportunity as well. And I had really great staff that had a variety of experiences. So they taught me as well. So I
Yeah.
had industrial hygienists on the staff, for example. That's how I learned a lot of the instrumentation, was really self-study and learning from my team along the way. From there, I actually started Safe Tech
Okay.
in 1990, believe it or not. And so for 17 years, I had employees then, and we did consulting globally,
Hmm.
a lot of high hazard chemical facilities, so a lot of travel. Um, and I learned from every facility I went into.
Hmm.
Um, and so over time, I think over those 17 years, my experience just got broader and broader. And one of the things that my clients found was that they liked having that sort of um, two parts of my background,
Yeah.
because I could look at things from different angles.
Yeah.
And and during that whole time, LL Bean was one of my clients.
Okay.
And so they had full staff, and they were one of my clients. But again, um, Bob Peixoto, who was the COO at the
Hmm.
time, who I had done work for, and others in the organization, had recruited me for this role.
Okay.
And um, and they really needed an executive level role. They
Okay.
had never had that level role in the organization, although they've had health, safety, and wellness operations to various degrees over time. And in fact, their wellness operation had been in place for 30 years before I went there.
Okay.
But I think what they saw was that broader background was a good fit in that organization. They had, and they still have a core value of safe and healthy living.
Right.
And that's one of the 6 company core values. And so even though in the past they had had people that had managed the program that had industrial hygiene or safety background, they hadn't had somebody that had the broader.
Yeah.
And they had on-site clinics and so forth. So this was just an opportunity to do something different. So
Sure.
that's why I said sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's just right place, right time. But I think, the idea is when you have an opportunity like that, quite frankly, they were one of the few clients, even though I had a lot of Fortune 500 clients, where I felt that I could actually make an impact.
Okay.
And that was really, because obviously that was a big decision after 17
Sure.
years of running my own
Running
firm.
your own business. Yeah.
And then I had to figure out what to do with my business as
Mhm.
well. So that was a big decision, but I needed a change at that point. Believe it or not, even running your own business, you can change it up. I changed it up probably 5 different times, but I needed something else. I needed
Yeah.
another challenge, and that's how I saw that. And I also had a really great staff person who was willing to take over the training side of the business.
Okay.
So Carolyn actually purchased the training side of the business from me. So that allowed my clients to still continue to have services, because
Yeah.
clearly they didn't want us to go away either.
Sure. Um, you touched on something. Well, before we touch on some things I wanted to ask you about at your time at LL Bean, I had a question about where you acquired your business skills, Deb. When you became an ASP fellow in 2018, I'm quoting Kathy Seabrook here as saying, uh, Deb Roy is a consummate safety and health professional, thought leader, and business executive. Now, as you know, many OHS professionals aspire to achieve those combination of skills. Where did your business management skills come from? Did it come from running your own business, your consulting firm, or did you learn from like the CEO or the COO of LLB? Those management skills, those business skills, where'd they come from?
First, I'm quite humbled by Kathy's opinion, so I thank her for that. I think again that was a combination of places. I grew up in a family with who were entrepreneurs.
Okay.
Um, and my father took over a business that my grandfather had started, a small local business. My mother was a CPA and had her own business for many years. And so consequently, I think that idea of business was not scary to me
Mm-hmm.
for that reason. Um, and I think over the years, it was an interest. As you can imagine, if you run your own business, you either have to hire the skills or you have to learn it yourself.
Right.
And so I think I did a combination of that. And I decided I needed to learn those skills. I actually did do a variety of MBA coursework.
Okay.
Actually, before I went to grad school in the
Okay.
field, for a couple of years, I did MBA coursework. So I did have some educational background in that area. But I would say a lot of it was running my own business. And uh, and over that time, I also started teaching safety professionals
Okay.
I did an intro to consulting class. I did it actually for occupational health nurses first, and then later taught the business side of consulting basically to safety professionals. I learned a lot again from the participants in that group along the way. And then I would say that in the leadership roles I had in my career, I learned from other people. As I said, even back in the tantalum capacitor plant at the beginning, the director of engineering and the plant manager were very supportive of me. They taught me how to do business proposals. They taught me the process in that company to actually work within that management group. So I think I started pretty young, sort of learning those steps, and then along the way picked up more and more skills from the people I worked with. The same thing goes in the environmental firm. I mean, this was a global environmental firm, and the COO at the time was the same age as I was, which was 29.
Wow.
So, that was in the days in the environmental industry where it was a young crowd, and it was a very strappy entrepreneurial kind of group. And so consequently, and we all worked a lot of hours, and it was just the way it was. So I got to see that side of it and learn from that group, then my own firm, and then at Beans. And I would say my leader at LL Bean, Bob Picciotto, was a great leader, and he retired about halfway through the time that I was there. But he taught me a lot, and so did the other management team. And the opportunities I've had both in the environmental industry, then with my own consulting firm, and at Beans, I interacted with mostly senior leaders. And so you have that opportunity to sort of learn from them. And one of the biggest things at Beans was, particularly initially with a more introverted senior management group, I had to learn my extroverted style was too much for them. I had to adapt, and I had to realize that they didn't want to hear all the details. Yes, I knew all the details of how to explain a situation in health and safety, but one of the things along the way that I quickly realized is, and Bob was very helpful with that, is really how to present information to the executive team so that I could be heard and I could be effective. And I think that's a really critical aspect of, and then with my own staff, really helping them to understand when they were developing material for me that they needed to do the same. And I was able to show them, okay, here's what you gave me. Here's what I need to do to this information to then move it to the next level. And so having had, leadership help me with that, I think is critical. And also I think it's important to pay it forward.
Play it forward. I wanted to touch on an aspect of LL Bean's culture, and you talked about it being there for decades before you arrived at LL Bean, the wellness and health consciousness. I'm seeing more of that today, Deb, more of an emphasis in companies, not just on safety, but it seems like the profile of the health aspects, even the mental health aspects of workers, and the term well-being of workers just seems to be on the radar screen more today than, say, 15 years ago, certainly. Your thoughts on how professionals can encourage their workforce to follow healthy lifestyles and be more active and health conscious. I get the sense that this is something that a lot of professionals have not had a lot of experience with. A lot of experience with safety, maybe, OSHA compliance, but when it comes to promoting wellness and healthy lifestyles, healthy choices, what are your thoughts about what professionals can do to encourage a workforce in that direction?
Well, I think as safety professionals, we have a lot of opportunities to do that. And it is part of our prevention mission, I
Mhm.
believe, to be able to really focus on how do we keep people from getting hurt. And one of those ways is to make sure that they're safe up front.
Mhm.
And the way to do that is to be sure that they are physically capable of doing those jobs. And it is a broader, I think, mission for most
Right.
safety professionals that they haven't done before.
Mhm.
But again, I think it's an opportunity for them to learn those elements and see how they fit in. So, for example, um, somebody that is a smoker, there is great research, and there has been for many years, that says smokers have a higher incidence of low back issues.
Oh, really? Okay.
Um, so, if you have a population that has a high percentage of smokers, do you have opportunities for them to quit smoking?
Mhm.
Do you have a framework for them to learn to reduce smoking?
Mhm.
So, for example, one of the things Beans did, and this was before I was there, um, Maine, which is where the primary corporate offices are, had a very high smoking rate.
Okay.
And so many years ago, the wellness team at LL Bean decided they needed to really approach that. They had been doing smoking cessation classes, live classes in those days,
Mhm.
and but they realized over time that unless you change the environment, you're not supporting the individuals. And this has been one of the things, and this has been one of the issues with uh, facilities that have organized labor. The
Right.
focus has always been, the concern was, okay, well, if you're going to push wellness, you're just telling those people that their behavior is bad,
Mhm.
and that's a problem. Well, that's not the case. You really have to back up and look at how are you supporting that behavior change as a
Mhm.
company. And so as you in Maine, for example, I believe it was 1989. They stopped allowing smoking in a traditional workplace.
Okay.
So the state laws helped,
Mhm.
um, and a lot of the state laws, particularly down south, were much more recent.
Yeah.
But so when people couldn't smoke in their offices or inside anymore, they had to smoke outside. So that starts the first phase. You can't smoke in the building.
Right.
Then you start moving people away from the building.
Mhm.
And then they started building covered areas so people could go out and smoke in the rain and so forth. And that was very common in a lot of
Yeah, I
places.
remember those shelters. Yeah.
The smoking shelters.
Yes.
So, and then you move away from that, and then you have smoke-free campuses.
Okay.
Um, and as you move smoking out of the workplace and further away, if somebody's at work for 8 hours plus a day, they have to come up with a strategy for being there for 8 hours without
Mhm.
smoking. Um, and so one of the opportunities at that point is to then, as you make those changes, continue to offer more and more smoking cessation. And obviously these days, depending on if you have a remote workforce, you may have to do that virtually as
Yeah.
well. Um,
Yeah.
and Beans was doing that anyway by the
Mhm.
time I was there. But those are the kinds of things. So for example, at Beans, when they started, the smoking rate was something over 20%.
Right.
And when I just retired from there in November, our smoking rate was about 5%.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and in the offices, it was probably 1%. The
Wow.
rest of it is because
Yeah.
of the distribution and manufacturing and so forth with a broader workforce. But what's really interesting with that is when we look and graph that data, and this is all self-reported data,
Mhm.
you actually can see each individual change that happened that was an environmental change, you could see it on the graph.
Okay. Yeah.
And you can see a reduction each time those environmental changes were made. And so just throwing smoking cessation classes doesn't solve it.
Right.
You really have to do the education, you have to do the classes, but you need to also create a change in the environment.
Yeah.
So, that's an example of something that I think safety people can actually work with their leadership. You can do the same kinds of things with exercise.
Right.
So if you don't have fitness facilities on the sites, those can be added. If you can't do that, you can have arrangements with local fitness centers to do a reduced price kind of thing. So all of those things actually allow that individual to then broaden what's available to those workers. And if a company has an interest in going down this road, the WellCOA, which is the Wellness Council of America, has lots of free material on their website on how to design a wellness program that anybody could use. And years ago for ASSP, I did full day wellness classes for safety professionals. And some of those people still keep up with me today. They're safety professionals who also have responsibility for wellness, and they've continued to run those programs. So part of it is you may have some short-term opportunities, use those. If not, then start, and if you've got the leadership support, start looking at a comprehensive approach. And the WellCOA information is a good place to start, to look at how do I plan a more comprehensive approach. And it really needs to be a collaborative approach. It's probably not just the safety person.
Right.
It's probably HR and operations and other people. And there may be some other champion within the organization that would support that as well.
Yeah, I would think it'd be a cross-discipline initiative.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me switch gears. You mentioned ASSP, Deb. You've been a member of ASSP since 1993, I believe.
Yes.
Now you're president-elect. So I was wondering, over the past quarter century or so, how have you seen ASSP as an organization grow and evolve?
Interesting. My involvement in ASSP initially was really just to network, quite honestly. It was really to start. I was working in safety. I had my consulting firm by then, and that was really my reason for being there. So I went to the conferences. I started to get involved in the task forces that were running the various symposia at that time. And I started teaching at the conference, and that was really my initial connection. Because I had already done the whole chapter system through the AAOHN, I didn't have an interest in participating in leadership in that whole process. So I got involved in other ways. And I would say that my experience with then ASSE, now ASSP, is it really the same or similar to the evolution of safety. I would say early on, it was a much more structured, black and white sort of compliance, so from an education standpoint, those are the things that were offered. And therefore, organizationally, most of us as members were in that mindset.
Yeah, that's what the early 90s were about, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say that's how the organization supported that, because that's where the members were. I think as the members started to broaden their viewpoint, the organization did as well. And from an educational standpoint, from a committee standpoint, from a process standpoint, I think they started really opening up the kinds of things that were offered in the organization to the membership. And so I think it has tracked pretty closely to sort of where we've gone. So I see the membership having moved from that straight compliance
Compliance.
and and now moved to the broader view of looking at risk,
Mhm.
and safety management systems. My own teaching over that time changed as well, just because that's
Right.
where the industry was going, and therefore that was the consulting I was doing, was that higher level, broader
Yeah.
consulting. And I see that's where a lot of the membership went. And I think that the organization then evolved, got into more soft skills,
Mhm.
and offered more opportunity for safety and health professionals as they sort of moved through their career. Um, and I think that's where I see us moving in the future. You mentioned total worker health
Yeah.
earlier. I see us moving in that direction. So I think it's just an evolution, and I see ASSP just tracking to that
Okay.
evolution. So I'm seeing, for example, a lot more interest in ASSP in research and in broadening, the experience of the members, and also looking at how we can support our um, organizations with this broader mission.
Yeah.
And productivity is a big issue for most companies. We know, though, that these companies that um, really support workers in the broader way actually do better financially.
Sure.
Um, and interestingly enough, in my LLB experience, um, the many year president and CEO, who was a family member, Leon Gorman, when they started their programming initially, it was really because Leon decided it was the right thing to do. And it's a
Mhm.
family owned company, and he could do that.
You could do it. Yeah.
And he didn't do it because it was good business. But the reality is, it is good business.
Yeah.
And really, for OSH professionals to really look at this broader view, and for ASSP to support that, is really important, because it better supports the organizations that we work for,
Okay.
and those workers.
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at all the items, all the inputs to that worker, and trying to address that environment that
Mhm.
worker has to be in for 8+ hours a day, then you're going to better support that workforce,
Sure.
and they're going to have higher productivity.
Yeah. You've done a good job of explaining the evolution of ASSP and where the organization is in 2020, Deb. Leads me to the question of, okay, what goals do you have uh, for your presidency in the next year, given this expanded scope of ASSP's mission, if you will, the expanded scope of responsibilities that the membership has? What do you want to accomplish in your year as president?
Well, thank you for asking. You can imagine that it's shifted a bit.
Mm-hmm.
um, I didn't realize that I was going to be doing COVID.
Yeah.
So, but I would say COVID-19 is a major aspect of what I'm doing. And so that's one thing, and I'll explain that a little further in a moment. I would say total worker health is another.
Okay.
And then I would say the value of the profession. And so those would be the three things that I really want to focus on for this next year. If I go back to the COVID-19, obviously that wasn't my choice,
Right.
but it's where we're at.
All right. None of our choices. Yeah.
Exactly. But I will tell you that one of my clients said to me early on, that I worked my entire career just for this moment,
Wow.
because my background just is a good fit
Mm-hmm.
to the COVID risk. And I never thought about it that way, But I think it does give me an opportunity with ASSP right now as well. I've been able to help with the COVID-19 education that we've been doing for
Right.
members, the webinars and the podcasts and so forth.
I was going to say, which is a lot. Yeah.
Articles. So I feel good about that I can give something back to our members, and all of that is we're offering for free to anybody. And I think that's been a great resource, and I've gotten great feedback from that. So that's, I think, one piece. The other piece is understanding enough about this risk, this business risk, to help the organization so that we can come out on the other side of this pandemic. And because it's reality, just like any organization right now, we're all having to deal with the impacts of the pandemic.
Right.
And ASSP is no different than any other organization. So I think that's where I see a big piece of my responsibility in this next year is both the COVID education piece, but also the supporting ASSP from a business standpoint because of COVID.
Right.
The second piece I mentioned was total worker health. Obviously, this is an area that I have of interest, and it's something that I had a great opportunity at LL Bean because I was responsible for health, safety, environmental, and wellness in that organization at the executive level. I had a great opportunity to actually move the total worker health mission forward in that organization. I'd like to see us as ASSP be able to support our members to be able to do the same. And there is a life cycle of any of these these topics. I would say total worker health with safety professionals right now is still in its infancy.
Early stages.
It's the early stages. Some of us have been doing it for 10 years. Others are just hearing the concept. And I think just like we did moving away from just compliance, we have a responsibility to help our colleagues sort of broaden their view of this topic so that they can actually be a better resource to their leadership and the workers. So I think that's another focus that I have, is to really get the word out about how helpful this is. And the fact is, companies that actually do total worker health, just like companies that did risk programming and safety management systems, will find that productivity increases and their costs will go down. And so I think that's a really important piece. And if you think about the workforce today in the US, I mean, I'm in Maine, which is the oldest state in the nation. One of the reasons that it was an easy sell at LL Bean for me is because our average age was almost 50.
Right.
And so the leadership completely understood that the healthcare costs were going to kill us. And we were self-insured for healthcare. And consequently, it was a pretty easy sell when I could show the cost benefit. And again, that's part of the executive leadership as well. You have to be able to use the terminology they understand. But they got it pretty quickly and supported it really quickly. And then the third area, the value of the profession, I think sort of ties into the COVID situation right now, as well as in general with safety professionals. We have a unique opportunity at this particular point to have our leadership recognize what we can offer to those businesses. And if you think about it, a lot of leadership in organizations, when we started this whole pandemic, didn't know anything about infectious disease or how to respond or any of the elements of what these public health efforts mean. And a lot of us professionals can step in and provide that resource. So they started getting asked for help. And for some people, it's the first time that's happened. So I think it's a great opportunity to have more visibility and to be able to then learn to properly present that information to senior leadership. And as I said earlier, that is a skill that takes time and effort and some education. But the fact is, this is a great time for safety professionals to actually have visibility.
Yeah.
Once you have that visibility, you may be able to move your programming forward more quickly.
Okay.
And I think that's really critical. But the profession in general really has moved from that place we started, which was just somebody there to check the boxes for
Right.
compliance. And I think we have so much more to offer. And I would really encourage the OSH professionals to really do all you can to learn um, the skills that you need to be able to support your organization.
Yeah.
And in that process, you will become more visible, and it also will help you to move through your career.
Okay. One more question for you, Deb. Given your background in health and listening to you talk, I don't get the idea that you think COVID is going to be something that disappears by the end of the summer. What are your thoughts about how long the country and professionals are going to be living with COVID guidelines, COVID protocols, et cetera? Your
Well,
thoughts?
I think I've been asked that on every webinar that, that I've done. And it's a difficult question to answer. And so my first answer is it depends.
Right.
I do think there are a variety of scenarios that have been put out there. One is that we will have a large second wave in the fall, winter, when the flu season
Mm-hmm.
happens, and we'll have these two issues at the same time. That's, I think, one possibility. The other is that we have wavelets over time. And I
Okay.
think right now in some parts of the country, from what I'm reading, we're starting to see the positivity rates go back up in some
Uh,
parts of the country.
I've seen that just this week in some
Yeah.
articles. Yeah.
So, and that's a concern. And I don't know if that's one of the wavelets that I just mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
um, or not. But I am worried about the flu season. We had a really bad flu season this last year.
Mm-hmm.
We could have another one this year. And that would actually mean that it may get bad enough during the winter that hospitals are starting to be overwhelmed again, and we've got to do some more mitigation
Yeah.
of keeping people home. So I hope that doesn't happen, but I think
Sure.
it's still a possibility. So I would say for employers, I'm looking at the need to make these changes for at least a year, maybe
Yeah.
two, because even if we have a vaccine, with the anti-vax sentiment in the US, I
Right.
think we're going to have some difficulty. First of all, producing that much vaccine, even if they start early,
Right.
worldwide, because it's not just in the US where this pandemic is happening. And I think people forget that, yes, we have a lot of places in the world that are working on vaccine, but we now have to produce vaccine for everyone, not just for us.
Yeah.
And so producing enough vaccine is the first issue, and then administering all of that,
Right.
um, it's going to take time. And with uh, with some people not being willing to be vaccinated, it's going to take a while before we develop herd immunity.
Right.
And and this virus is so different because we've never been exposed to it before.
Right.
When you're dealing with influenzas, um, a lot of them are very similar to what people were exposed to even 20 or 30 years ago, and they have some immunity.
Mm-hmm.
We have none.
Yeah.
And right now, there's a lot of supposition as to what percentage of the population um, are immune.
Mm-hmm.
We have no idea. We don't
Yeah.
know if those people that have antibodies right now are going to have them 6 months from now. So, it appears, based on the fact that they've been able to use convalescent serum to actually treat individuals who are in the hospital,
Right.
that there is some benefit to that. Um, but we honestly don't know what happens longer term.
Yeah.
My hope is that this once you develop immunity, that it's at least going to last for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And by then, the virus may have mutated enough. But unlike flu virus, it's really interesting with this particular beta coronavirus because we're not seeing huge mutations in it.
Yeah.
We're seeing variations so they can track where it came from. But from all I've read from the technical literature, we're not seeing huge mutations at all,
Yeah.
which is really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an ongoing story, and yeah, I don't think the future's unwritten, really. I think you've done a good job of describing that. Deb, thanks so much for taking time out of a very busy schedule. I know as president-elect, and the ASSP meeting is coming up in just 2 weeks, I believe.
Yep.
So I know how busy you must be right now. Really appreciate you joining us on this podcast. You've given some very expansive answers that I think are going to be helpful to listeners. Again, just really appreciate you joining ISHN and ASSP and spending time with us this morning.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and thank you so much for asking.
Thanks, Deb. And thank you, folks, for listening.